Sometimes, life changes in an instant when we least expect it. Near death, a millionaire cowboy, known for his solitude and fame, finds unexpected refuge in a small house inhabited by a widow and her children. What seemed like a casual encounter soon transforms into a journey that will forever change the destiny of that family and reveal secrets capable of shaking even the hardest heart. The late afternoon sun cast a golden light over the arid vastness of inner Texas, where the hot wind blew among the sparse trees and the dust danced slowly in the air. It was a land of extremes, where rustic beauty shared space with the harshness of daily survival. There, in the midst of this inhospitable scenery, was the small farm of Clara Henderson, a widow who, despite the difficult years, kept hope alive for her 3 children. Clara was the kind of woman who seemed to carry the whole world on her back, but never showed weakness. Her face, marked by the sun and sleepless nights, bore a determined yet tired expression. Her husband's death, months earlier, was still an open wound in her soul, a void she tried to fill with work and care for her children. The small ranch, though modest and often threatened by drought and bills, was the only home they knew, and she would do anything to protect it. That afternoon, Clara walked through the dry garden, patiently watering the few flowers that had survived the harsh climate. Her calloused hands worked carefully, while her mind wandered between bills to pay, the harvest that promised little, and an uncertain future. Her children played on the porch, laughing and running, oblivious to their mother's silent worries. Sarah, the eldest daughter, with her golden hair and bright eyes, tried to be a second mother to her younger siblings, Tommy and Lily. Tommy, full of energy and curiosity, couldn't sit still for a moment, while Lily, the youngest, with her big, innocent eyes, watched everything with a mixture of fascination and tenderness. For them, that house was a safe place, despite all the difficulties. But that afternoon, something changed. Far away, John McAllister rode slowly, feeling every muscle protest with the pain that spread through his body. He was a man known throughout the region, the millionaire cowboy, owner of vast lands and a past few dared to question. John's fame came not only from his fortune, but from the aura of mystery and solitude that surrounded him. Few knew him truly. He was a lonely figure, immersed in his own demons. His recent journey, however, had been marked by a near-fatal accident. His horse, startled by a distant thunder, threw him violently in the middle of the road, causing serious injuries that prevented any easy movement. John fought against the growing weakness, knowing that at any moment he could succumb right there in the middle of nowhere. As the sun set and his strength waned, he spotted the silhouette of Clara's farm in the distance. It was an unexpected sight, a flash of hope amid the approaching darkness. With difficulty, he guided his horse to the place, staggering to the porch. Each step was a battle against the pain, but something inside him drove him not to give up. When Clara heard the hoarse groan coming from outside, her heart tightened. She had never imagined that night would bring such an unusual visit. As she opened the door, her eyes met a fallen man, covered in dust and dried blood, with a look that mixed desperation and resilience. "Please, help me," was all he could manage to say, his voice weak and almost gone. Without a second thought, Clara helped him inside. The children watched, curious and apprehensive, as the woman fetched water to clean the wounds and blankets to warm the stranger. She knew nothing about this man, nor his story, but compassion spoke louder. In the minutes that followed, a heavy silence took over the house. Clara felt the weight of that responsibility, a stranger at her door, wounded and vulnerable, who could be both a blessing and a problem. But as she looked at John, she saw something more than pain. She saw a tired soul, fighting for survival, just like her. John, in turn, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, the feeling that perhaps, in that simple place, he could find a little peace. Something in Clara's eyes, and the life she was trying to rebuild with so much effort, touched a deep place in his heart. That night, under the starry Texas sky, two worlds that should never have crossed paths united by the force of destiny. What began as an act of compassion would soon transform into a connection that would forever change the lives of that widow, her children, and the millionaire cowboy himself. Little did they know that the challenges to come would test every fiber of their strength, and that, between losses and discoveries, a story of redemption, courage, and hope would be born. In the days that followed John McAllister's unexpected arrival, Clara's farm seemed to gain a new rhythm, a delicate mixture of hope and tension. The man who was a stranger to everyone, with his past shrouded in mystery, now rested in the modest bedroom of the house, fighting against the pain and the very despair that threatened to consume him. Clara took care of him with dedication. Although the weight of responsibilities and doubts weighed on her shoulders like never before, the children watched with curiosity and a mix of apprehension. Sarah, especially, felt an urgent need to understand that stranger who had invaded their small and delicate world. She saw him as a kind of enigma, a man marked by scars that went beyond the skin, someone who carried an invisible burden. But for Tommy and Lily, John was just someone who breathed little and sometimes spoke words that were difficult to understand. Despite the care and seemingly calm routine, Clara felt the shadow of difficulties growing every day. Keeping the farm running without her husband was already an enormous challenge. Now, with a wounded man to care for, bills were tight, the stock was dwindling, and time seemed to be running against her. The neighbors, who once exchanged quick greetings, began to whisper, a single woman taking care of a millionaire stranger. It was a risk, they said, maybe even madness. John, in turn, was not just fighting his physical wounds. The deepest pain was that of the soul. He carried secrets and past mistakes that threatened to finally bring him down. His fortune, his titles, and his properties no longer defined him at that moment. He felt like a stripped man, vulnerable, and his pride, once his armor, began to crumble. In the first weeks, the silence between Clara and John was punctuated only by small gestures, an exchanged look, a tired sigh, or the distant sound of the wind that seemed to want to tell forgotten stories. He was reserved, reluctant to reveal his true identity or what had led him to that situation. Clara, in turn, respected that invisible wall, but her intuition told her there was much more to that man than a simple adventure or accident. The forced coexistence began to create tenuous bonds, sustained by necessity and silent empathy. John, despite his initial distrust, began to find in the simplicity of that house a comfort he had never experienced among the luxurious halls and high society parties. The children's shy laughter, the modest meals, Clara's small acts of care, all of it, though strange for a man of his past life, awakened in him an unexpected desire to get back on his feet. However, the difficulties were not long in intensifying. One day, a messenger arrived at the farm with news that John feared hearing his fortune was being threatened. Dark deals, disloyal partners, and impatient creditors began to surround him, like lurking wolves. The isolation he sought in Clara's refuge now seemed like a prison, where time was running out and the future was becoming increasingly uncertain. Clara, upon discovering this news, felt a mixture of worry and anger, not just for the danger that surrounded John, but for what that could mean for the farm and her children. The help she had offered seemed to be attracting storms that could destroy everything she was fighting to keep standing. Meanwhile, the relationship between John and Clara's children began to change. Sarah approached him with a mixture of admiration and caution, trying to understand who that man was who had something of a tired hero, someone who could be as fragile as he was strong. Tommy, curious and impulsive, tried to help, although his actions sometimes complicated things even more. And Lily, with her innocent eyes, simply wished that stranger would stay forever, not knowing the weight he carried. Internal conflicts also surfaced in Clara. She felt torn between the duty to protect her family and a growing sympathy for John, who was becoming more and more present in their lives. The tension of the unknown, the pressure of circumstances, and the uncertainty about the future made each day a silent battle. What would that encounter mean? Would it be a blessing in disguise or a cruel trap? Time passed, and with it came the first difficult decisions. John needed to get up, to fight to save not only himself, but also those who had become his new family. Clara would have to trust, even without guarantees, and the children would learn that life sometimes demands courage beyond what we imagine. In the midst of this whirlwind of emotions, an unexpected event shook the fragile peace of the farm something that would forever change the course of that story and put to the test everything they believed was possible. A shadow from John's past was approaching, bringing with it secrets and dangers that none of them could ignore. The refuge that seemed safe now turned out to be a minefield where every choice carried unpredictable consequences. And as the twilight of hope tried to resist, hidden forces began to move, announcing that the path ahead would be arduous and full of surprises. That morning began like any other on the farm. The sun rose shyly on the horizon, spreading a golden light that softened the shadows of the night. But there was a different mood in the air, an invisible tension that seemed to hover over every corner of Clara's small home. John, still weakened, watched through the window as the first rays warmed the dry land. In his heart, a whirlwind of thoughts and memories mixed with the difficult reality that surrounded him. The night before, something had happened that no one could have predicted. As Clara was taking care of the children in the kitchen, she heard the distant sound of horses galloping down the dirt road. A shiver ran down her spine, an unsettling premonition. Before she could react, two figures appeared at the entrance to the farm, men of a tough appearance, dressed in warm clothes but with eyes full of authority and threat. They came on behalf of John's business, but they also brought with them secrets from the past that he was trying to leave behind. "John McAllister?" the older man asked in a firm voice, with no room for doubt. "That's me," he replied, his voice full of determination. The visitors did not just come to collect debts. They brought news of a betrayal that threatened to destroy everything John had built. A longtime partner, someone he trusted, had made decisions behind his back, negotiating lands and properties without his consent, ruining his reputation and putting his fortune at risk. More than that, they revealed a dark past that John had kept buried, a secret that, if exposed, could forever tarnish his name and affect those who were now under his protection. Clara watched, silent, as the tension grew between the men. The reality she was beginning to accept, the fragility of that refuge, became even more evident. The presence of those men was not just a financial threat. It was an invitation for John to face ghosts he had tried to avoid for years. The children, without fully understanding what was happening, retreated to the bedroom, their eyes briefly crossing with John's, who tried to convey a calm he did not feel. Sarah, especially, noticed a change in the man she had begun to admire. A shadow passed through his eyes, mixing fear and anger. From that moment on, life on the farm changed forever. John could no longer hide. It was time to act, to face the enemies who were approaching and protect those he now considered his family. But the fight would not be easy. The man who had betrayed his trust had powerful allies, and the battle ahead promised to be more violent than anything he had ever faced. At the same time, Clara felt torn between fear and courage. The decision to welcome John now seemed more complex. She needed to be strong not only for her children, but for that wounded man who, despite everything, awakened deep and unknown feelings in her. Her own life was intertwined with his destiny, and the security they sought together was about to be threatened. As the following weeks passed, the dangers silently approached. John began to reorganize his business from a distance, with the help of a few loyal allies. But the physical and emotional exhaustion was evident. The constant pain in his body reflected the weight of the challenges he faced. Clara, in turn, sought ways to protect the farm and her children, even when everything seemed to conspire against them. The relationship with John deepened, united by the struggle and shared vulnerability. They began to trust each other in a way neither of them expected, discovering strengths where before there had only been doubts. However, the real turning point was yet to come. One night, while the farm slept under the starry blanket of the Texas sky, an unexpected visitor knocked on the door. It was someone from John's past, someone who knew his darkest secrets and who brought a proposal that would change everything. The choice was simple but cruel: to give up the past and the shadows that haunted him, or to fight with all his might, risking not only his life, but the lives of everyone he now loved. John's decision that night would define the future of the farm, of Clara's family, and perhaps of his own redemption. As the moon lit the way, the silence of the night seemed to presage that nothing would be the same again. The weeks that followed the unexpected encounter were marked by a heavy, almost palpable atmosphere that seemed to suffocate every corner of the farm. The air, once filled with the aroma of dried flowers and warm soil, now carried a weight of uncertainty and fear. Clara, John, and the children lived under the constant shadow of the past that had reappeared, bringing not only external threats but also internal battles that left deep marks. John, who was already suffering from the physical pains of the accident, now faced an even crueler emotional torment. Each night was a struggle against his own ghosts, the betrayal of his partner, the shadow of debts, and the fear of losing everything that he was finally beginning to regain. His mind, once focused only on survival, now had to face strategic battles to save his empire and protect the family he had found in that unexpected refuge. The visitor from the past who had knocked on the farm's door was not just a messenger of bad news, but a figure wrapped in mysteries and dubious intentions. He proposed a dark deal to John, a chance to recover part of his business, but at the cost of accepting an alliance that would risk not only his values, but also the safety of those he most cherished. It was a cruel dilemma: to trade integrity for survival, or to fight against forces that seemed invincible. Clara, although she did not know all the details, felt the tension that gnawed at John. She watched him during the moments of silence, when the man's eyes seemed to wander to distant places, lost in painful memories. She also fought against her own fears. The love that was beginning to blossom between them was a delicate ground, made of uncertainties and hopes. She knew that, to protect her children, she would have to be the firm rock that John could lean on, even when he himself wavered. The children, though still innocent, noticed the change. Sarah, more sensitive than her siblings, felt the weight of responsibility growing on her small shoulders. She tried to maintain normalcy for Tommy and Lily, but inside she carried an anxiety that made her question the future. Tommy, impetuous and full of energy, reacted with rebellion, seeking in movement and escape from the tension that surrounded them. Lily, the youngest, felt the heavy silence between the adults and tried to fill the gaps with her sweetness, without understanding the gravity of what was happening. The tension reached its peak one afternoon when the farm was invaded by unknown men. Without announcing themselves, they appeared like shadows in the middle of the day, bringing veiled threats that made Clara hold her children tight against her chest, while John faced the visitors with fierce eyes. That silent attack was not just an attempt at intimidation, but a clear warning that war had been declared. The confrontation, however, was not just physical. It was also a battle of wills and strategies. John gathered strengths he didn't even know he had, commanding a resistance that united old and new allies. Clara, in turn, discovered a strength she didn't know she had, defending her home and children with a fierce courage, like a lioness protecting her cubs. But the price of the fight was beginning to weigh. John's health worsened, resources were scarce, and the fear of losing the little they had grew every day. The trust between him and Clara, however, became the thin thread that held the stability of the home. They shared fears, doubts, and dreams, finding in their union the strength to face whatever came. In the silence of the night, while the farm slept, both knew that the future was uncertain and that the choices made up to that point had profound consequences. The battle was not just against external enemies, but against their own limits, wounded pride, and the fear of loss. And in the midst of it all, there was a silent promise. The promise that, despite everything, they would fight together until the end. Because in that improbable refuge, something bigger than any problem or fear was born. The hope of a new beginning. The sun was barely rising on the horizon when the farm woke up with an unusual commotion. The air, normally calm and silent, was heavy, filled with the anticipation of something imminent. Clara, with her heart racing, watched through the window as John prepared to face another battle, not just against men who threatened his lands and his name, but against the very destiny that insisted on testing his strength. The fight had reached a critical point. The enemies did not back down, investing with an implacable ferocity, destroying fences, burning parts of the plantation, and spreading fear throughout the community. For John, each attack was a blow to the soul. He saw not only his empire crumble, but also the fragile life he was beginning to build alongside Clara and the children being threatened. That morning, however, John made a decision that would change everything. Gathering the little strength he had left, he summoned the loyal men who still believed in his cause. They were few, but determined, willing to fight to the end to save not only lands, but also the dignity and hope they carried. Clara, in turn, prepared the farm and the children for what could be the worst. She taught Sarah to protect her siblings, to remain calm even in the face of chaos, and to trust in the strength they found together. That woman's courage transformed into a shield and a sword, a symbol of resistance against adversity. The final confrontation began at dusk, when the sky was tinged with red and orange, reflecting the fire that consumed part of the property. The sound of gunshots, screams, and galloping echoes throughout the region. It was a war, a battle where every second was worth a life, and where everyone's destiny hung by a thread. John fought like a man who no longer had anything to lose, facing not only the visible enemies, but also the demons that had tormented him for years. Each blow was full of determination, each step a challenge against the pain that had almost defeated him. Clara, protected by the shadow of the night, helped care for the wounded and kept the children hidden, praying for that storm to pass. In the midst of the chaos, an unexpected moment of silence united John and Clara's eyes. In that instant, something beyond the physical battle happened, a deep understanding, a connection that transcended words. It was the silent promise that, no matter what happened, they would face what came next together. When the dust began to settle, the farm was destroyed, but not defeated. There were losses, marks, and scars, but also a lit flame that no one could extinguish. John, exhausted and wounded, looked at Clara and the children, and for a moment, saw more than survival. He saw the possibility of a future that, despite the difficulties, could be rebuilt. The victory was not complete, but it was enough to prove that the strength of love and determination could overcome even the cruelest storms. They knew that the path would be long and full of challenges, but together, they had found something unbreakable: hope. That night, while the starry sky watched in silence, the improvised family gathered around the small fireplace. The words were few, but the heart spoke loudly. John's dark past still lingered like a distant shadow, but now it was a past he was ready to face, not alone, but alongside those who had become his true family. And so, between losses and promises, tears and smiles, the journey of that millionaire cowboy and the widow with her children reached a decisive point. A moment where destiny tested them, but also gave them the chance to start over, to transform pain into strength and loneliness into love. The months that followed the battle left deep marks, but also paved the way for a new life. The farm, once almost destroyed, slowly began to be reborn from the ashes, just like the family that lived there. Clara, John, and the children faced each challenge with the strength that only those who have been through storms know, that unique combination of courage, love, and hope. John, although still carrying the scars of body and soul, found in the simplicity of that life something he had never experienced in his years of wealth and power. The security he sought was not in his properties or in the numbers of his fortune, but in that modest home, where the children, as laughter echoed, and Clara as affection enveloped him in a hug that healed more than any medicine. Clara, in turn, saw her world transform in a way she had never imagined. That man who arrived wounded and suspicious became a constant presence, a solid support who shared responsibilities, dreams, and fears. Her children, who had once known only struggle and deprivation, now had the promise of a different future, a future built with effort, unity, and love. Sarah, who had grown up too fast, learned from John that true strength is not in the absence of fear, but in the courage to face it. Tommy, with his uncontrollable energy, discovered the value of loyalty and sacrifice. And Lily, innocent and sweet, saw what it means to find a family where you least expect it. The threats that surrounded John did not disappear completely, but the man who was once dominated by loneliness and distrust learned to trust not only others but himself. He understood that redemption is not forgetting the past, but facing it with courage and an open heart. On a serene late afternoon, as the sun slowly set behind the hills, John and Clara sat on the porch, watching the children play in the field. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with everything that didn't need to be said. There was peace there, a peace hard-won but deeply deserved. "I never thought I would find all this here," John said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Clara smiled, her eyes shining in the warm light of the late afternoon. "Sometimes it's in the most unexpected places that we find what truly matters," she replied. The story of that millionaire cowboy and that widow with her children was not just about losses and battles, but about the strength of transformation, empathy, and the love that heals. It was a reminder that, even when everything seems lost, there is always a chance to start over, to build something new from the ruins of the past. And so, under the vast Texas sky, that improbable family began to write a new chapter. A chapter made of hope, unity, and the certainty that despite the storms, life can surprise, bringing light where before there was only darkness.